So I am going to talk to you today about device APIs. So very unlike Farouk's talk this morning, I'm going to talk about actually some JavaScript APIs that you can use in browsers today with a particular focus on the mobile web. And how we can actually go ahead and make the mobile web experience more, for lack of a better term, more native, so that you can emulate sort of native functionality on mobile devices with web technology. So as Chris mentioned, my name is Dave Johnson. I was the co-founder and CTO at a company called Natobi, based in Vancouver, Canada. And recently acquired by Adobe, and we created the PhoneGap framework back in 2008. And so it's essentially an approach to build cross-platform mobile applications using HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, which is, of course, what Web Directions is all about. So let's get right into that. So again, PhoneGap, recently it was reborn as Apache Cordova. So it was always free and open source, actually, and we just took the code, and it was under an MIT license previously, and now we've contributed all the code to the Apache Software Foundation to ensure the governance of the project going forward. At Adobe now, all the employees from previously from Adobe are working hard on Apache Cordova, and we're distributing it as PhoneGap now still. So you can go to phonegap.com to download it, and you'll see we're using Apache Cordova inside there. And of course, the idea behind this is we want to provide access to device APIs on mobile devices. So you can actually go and check out build.phonegap.com as well if you don't want to actually download SDKs and so on. You can go there and upload some HTML, JavaScript, CSS, and download a native application for your device, install it, and you can actually access device APIs. So PhoneGap, like I said, started around 2008. Brian LaRue is one of the originators of the project. He was an employee at Natobi at the time. And this was sort of a bold statement at the time. When we created PhoneGap, our reason for creating it was actually that we sort of wanted it to cease to exist. So in this Buddha Zen sort of thing going on, we actually wanted to push the web forward and sort of prototype and implement these APIs that were in discussion at W3C or the WhatWG or whatever, but we wanted to actually go and just write those APIs. And so that's essentially what we did with PhoneGap, and we implemented things like geolocation. So we were the first, for lack of a better term, maybe browser that actually implemented the geolocation specification. So you can go into, today, of course, you can go into any browser and you can say navigator.geolocation.getCurrentPosition, and you'll pretty much get your position. But PhoneGap was one of the first browsers, or probably the first browser, to actually implement that. So this statement, our purpose, is in many ways coming to fruition, which is good. So we made other bold statements as well at the time. I was like, well, this is a really fucking cool idea. Let's do it on BlackBerry 4.3, Android 1.5, WebOS, Symbian, and a whole bunch of other platforms. And then we were like, huh? So why the hell would you want to do that, right? Turns out that it actually worked pretty well. So we actually have support today for Windows Phone 7, pretty much every single BlackBerry platform there is, Android 1.5 through 4, iOS 3 through 5, Symbian, WebOS, Samsung Bata, Tizen, this new thing from Intel and Samsung, as well as Windows 8 coming up. So we actually went ahead and did that, and oddly enough, people liked it and they found it really useful. So today, there are people that are actually out there building apps with this and accessing native APIs, building native apps that access native APIs on web technologies. So this is just an example of Wikipedia. I'm sure everyone's heard of that. They have a cool app that they built for Android and iOS. They built the Android application using PhoneGap, and it took them a few months to get that up and running, and it took them, they said, about 1 day to get 80% of the app running on iOS, which is pretty cool. Oddly enough, the featured article on there when I took this picture was about a Canadian cabinet minister. Anyway, so you can go and download that today. It's super popular, of course, on the App Store and the Android market. Another example, you can actually make games with PhoneGap. So games aren't web technologies, especially on mobile platforms where you're constrained in terms of CPU, memory, and so on, it's not really an ideal place, but there are very, very popular games, such as this popular zombie game that just came out in North America, at least, in the US. I think it's one of the #1 games in the App Store, and built on PhoneGap technology. Of course, this is my personal favorite one called Untapped, which is really cool for tracking your beer check-ins. So it's like Foursquare for beer. I was using it extensively last night. Super fun. I would definitely say you should go check it out. And the other cool thing actually about these is that, talking about view source sort of stuff in Farouk's talk, you can actually go and download this, in particular for iOS. You can download the IPA, change it to a zip file, unzip it, inspect the contents, and you can just look at all the web content in there that they use to build this application. Just a side note, I'm IPA level 5, in case you were wondering. So back to web stuff. Of course, we all know where the web came from. Tim Biel, the inventor, of course, HTTP, URL, HTML. Amazing guy. He really didn't even maybe recognize the impact that he was going to have, I guess, in the early days of the internet. Bob Metcalfe, who is the co-inventor of Ethernet, said about essentially based on Tim's work, Mark Andreessen essentially developed the NCSA Mosaic browser. And so this is what Bob Metcalfe said about it, or he said about Andreessen and Bina, who developed Mosaic, that several million people suddenly noticed that the web might be better than sex. So I thought it was interesting to say might, but anyhow. It was interesting, though, of course, going from there, those basics of the Mosaic browser. I think for me, a real seminal time in web technology and device APIs was actually the XML HTTP request. And that really transformed a lot of things back in Internet Explorer 5.5. Ironically, they were trailblazing back then, and we still have to deal with it today. And of course, this was, if you look in the small print there, it was based on the NCSA Mosaic code. So I don't think either Tim nor Bob could have actually predicted the impact that the internet would have on the number of pictures of cats. And that's really the value of the internet, of course, as we know. There's a fascinating talk by Matt LeMay from Bitly. And people like us, he's saying, we like to think that articles on TechCrunch or stats about the Kindle Fire or the BlackBerry Playbook and links about those things. Those are the important things that people click on in Bitly. But in reality, you'll get a dozen, 2 dozen clicks on that. What people actually click on are pictures of cats. So that's what the foundation of the internet now is built on cats. So back in, of course, IE 5.5, that was a great time. XML HTTP request really revolutionized, I think, internet web applications in general. And we're still evolving, though. So hopefully we're going to get beyond cats at some point here. But let's take a look at where we are today and where we're going, sort of. So our quest for today is I'm going to just do a quick overview of HTML5, sort of current status. I think there's a few other people here, of course, that are going to be talking about HTML5, maybe, do you think? So I'm not going to talk about that too much, but then I'm going to focus more on the device APIs, what's out there today, and then look a bit ahead in terms of what are the challenges for device APIs going forward, of which there are many. So HTML5. This is, by the way, the Canadian HTML5 logo, in case you didn't know. So, and if you look really closely, you'll notice that the beaver is, for some reason, quite surly. So, I mean, look at him. He looks upset. I don't know what his problem is. Maybe the bear upset him. I don't know. So I think we have a lot to thank the WhatWG for, actually. So back in 2004, when they were created, they essentially said, what the hell, W3C? Why are you going so damn slow? Let's actually push forward and make something that people can use today. And so that really was the impetus behind HTML5 and what it's become. There was obviously a whole bunch of malarkey around XHTML, and I'm sure glad that ended. We don't have to put quotes in our attribute names anymore. Amazing. Now we have some standardized parsing for documents. So HTML5 has done wonders for that in general. Some of the new elements, of course, that we get access to, we have structural or semantic elements, like section, article, header, footer, and so on. Those are obviously fantastic features. We have some text-level elements. Code is a great one, of course, using it extensively here in my web-based presentation. Form elements, lots of good stuff going on there. And of course, rich content as well in the form of video and audio is, of course, very important. And Canvas. Canvas is awesome. Obviously, if you want to know more about these, you should go check out MDN as a fantastic resource. And thank you, Mozilla, for making that and the nice lanyards. So one good example here is what's going on with input types. So we have a lot of new and interesting ways to accept input into applications. So this is particularly relevant on mobile devices where you have a soft keyboard in particular. So if you use these sort of input types, you're going to get a specific keyboard on mobile devices, which is very useful. And certainly the latest Android and iOS devices support that quite well. There are a whole bunch of programmatic APIs that are part of what we like to call HTML5. So things like drag and drop, super important. Web workers is very important. That's actually dropping. I guess that's implemented now in iOS 5, for example, in Safari on there. Server events is very interesting. Sockets, also in iOS 5. Cross-document messaging, channel messaging. So, and I know actually I think Damon is going to be talking about HTML5 messaging right after this. Should be very interesting. Offline. Offline is obviously an increasingly important topic, I think, especially given that now we have mobile devices and we sort of think we're always online, but we're not really always online because, of course, we're dependent on carriers and all sorts of that stuff. So there is a lot of stuff that we have now for dealing with offline, including Navigate.online, and I don't know why there's a capital L there. Who decided to do that? App cache. There's a great talk at JSConf about how it's a douche. Web storage, WebSQL, I think everybody can agree that we hate WebSQL. IndexedDB is currently available, I think, in Chrome Firefox. It's quite good, not on mobile devices as of yet. And even, going as far as various file APIs for doing offline. So that stuff's all HTML5. And really, HTML5 is the new shiny. It's an evolution of where the web was going. Certainly, we have more expressive declarative tools. We have better access to rich content through things like video, audio, Canvas. Messaging is amazingly better. And the offline stuff is getting there. But again, it's still sort of a lot of the same in terms of the HTML declarative markup is a lot of the same. But and amazing content to be had talking about that today. So we're just moving forward in the way we always have, like Courage Wolf. So device APIs. What are device APIs? So device APIs are, on the one hand there, we have like the HTML5 elements. And those are obviously very useful. Input type camera or what have you, so you can actually take a picture with a camera and an input. But device APIs, on the other hand, are actually obviously imperative APIs that you use through JavaScript. So typically, you don't have any UI to use these device APIs. We like to group them into essentially 3 groups, being sensors, data, and outputs. So sensors, things that you can measure about your device, so things like geolocation, acceleration, and so on. Data being things like contacts, the file system, and outputs being things that you can outwardly do, like vibrate the device, for example. So for PhoneGap in particular, you can go check out docs.phonegap.com and see our specifications there for all the device APIs, which are more or less based on W3C standards or recommended standards or drafts and so on. So because we started in 2008, actually, we were implementing a lot of stuff that even now the W3C has dropped. So we were implementing it even too early. And so you'll see stuff in there actually in the PhoneGap documentation that's been dropped from W3C at this point. But we're still trying to keep up with where those standards are going. So there's certainly a few other organizational forces that have had an impact on how these APIs are evolving. Some of which being WAC, the wholesale application community. So they did an early thing around widgets or installable widgets. And so they had defined all of their own APIs there. Very, very similar to the PhoneGap APIs. Webinos is another similar project. And like I mentioned, we're basing a lot of it off of W3C and the device access and policy group, the DAP, and as well as the widgets. So things like the W3C widget package specification. So an XML specification for how you package HTML, JavaScript, and CSS content into an installable package. Some other things that are more interesting and more recent include things like the Mozilla Web API. So that's super interesting, very extensive, and we're going to be following that and looking at implementing stuff from there as well. And of course, we, on our own, we're actually implementing some APIs that are either not in W3C or trying to define some of our own standards as well. One other thing that I should mention is, in terms of these organizational forces, is Ringmark. So if you go to rng.io right now on your device, it actually is a test suite. So it's a collaboration between Facebook, Adobe, and a whole bunch of other companies. And it's essentially a test suite that tells you if your browser is good enough for building applications that could be sort of considered to be native, I guess. So they have some, essentially 3 rings. Most browsers can get through, well, all browsers get through the first ring. Most mobile browsers fail. All mobile browsers fail, actually, on the second ring. And then the third ring, nobody actually really gets to. And so the second ring, in particular, is interesting. So it contains things like support for Canvas, audio, video tags, so a whole bunch of HTML tags, as well as some device APIs, like being able to take pictures. So those are really important device APIs, such that you can actually build an application with web technology to build, for example, like Instagram or what have you. So, and there's so many apps out there that are native apps that require things like taking pictures. So I would definitely go check out the Ringmark initiative. So there's a few related things there as well, and these are less in the web space, but more in, I guess, in this case, carriers, who we all love, of course, and the carriers always have our best interests in mind, don't they? So they're obviously trying to get their own pieces of the device API pie as well, through things like billing, messaging, defining their own location services, things like speech recognition. So there are a few things there, like the wholesale application community and One API are important forces in that carrier space that are important to know about. And installable web apps also related, but well, essentially PhoneGap is, of course, an installable web app. And there's a few other areas like that, like W3C widgets that we're trying to follow, the Chrome Web Store, of course, and the Mozilla Open Web Apps. So there's a lot more interest now in installable web apps and that whole idea. And that, of course, means that we need these device APIs. So I'm going to look at, actually, all the relevant device APIs now that are available in PhoneGap and or defined in W3C standards. So the first one being geolocation. As I mentioned, we're the first browser to implement the geolocation API. Pretty simple API, get your current location. This is available now in all modern browser environments. It's a W3C candidate recommendation. And so there's related ones like you can watch your position and so on. This one in particular is sort of strange because it was one of the first APIs, device APIs that the W3C actually defined. And we sort of thought it was a bit weird that we're doing this get watch position, for example, or get watch position. That should just be watch position. But I mean, it's not really a webby way of doing things in terms of all we're doing is actually setting a listener. So it would be much nicer if you could actually say device.addEventListener location change, for example. So that's one of the sort of fronts that PhoneGap is going to try to push ahead on and actually maybe bring some sanity to some of those APIs. Vibration, a great API, available in PhoneGap, supports landing in WebKit. This one's a pretty easy and sort of innocuous API to have actually in a browser. Vibration, I mean, maybe if you combined it with accelerometer, you could tell something about the person. Like if the device is in their pocket, you could read the accelerometer data based on the vibration and determine where they are or something, or what they're doing. But in general, it is landing in WebKit and a pretty common one. Obviously, somewhat useful in applications. Currently in PhoneGap, we do navigator.notification.vibrate. Related to this, of course, the accelerometer, gyroscope, magnetometer. These are the geo specification, essentially. Yeah, understand the device orientation, the direction and rate of change of the device. These are all obviously very interesting sensors. Accelerometer, we have the window.onDeviceMotion event. I love the acceleration including gravity.x is a great property name. Almost as good as device orientation property names for your event, for your data, which are alpha, beta, and gamma. Who knows what those ones are? Anyone? No? Yeah. One person, excellent. So this is all based on the W3C Geo spec, the device orientation. It's an editor's draft. And these are all actually available in the browser, just on the mobile web browser on iOS 4.2 plus, Android 3 plus, BlackBerry Playbook. So those are certainly coming. Again, a lot like vibration, those have fewer security concerns. You know, if somebody accesses your accelerometer or gyroscope information, it's not, you know, hugely a privacy concern. I don't know, maybe Mark Zuckerberg could do something amazing with it, but most people can't. So actually, if you can capture that QR code or just check out the tiny URL there, you can bring that up on your iOS or Android device and take a look at it. Of course, being standards-based APIs and having to be implemented by these various browser vendors, if you do get that to run and you happen to have an Android and an iOS device, you'd actually see that the Android device, the HTML5 logo is upside down if you hold it this way, and on the iOS device, it's right side up. So they still can't even agree on what alpha and gamma actually mean in these device APIs. One would have thought that would be easy. So the magnetometer, or magnometer, is the compass. There is a W3C draft. And this showing here is how PhoneGap does it. There are also some events that you can access based on W3C. Those aren't actually implemented anywhere yet. And we actually implemented it because we had to before there was really any reasonable specification for it. And so we implemented it, sadly, the same way we implemented the geolocation because we thought that's probably what they were going to do for the spec. So it's pretty ugly, and that's probably going to change. But you can access it in PhoneGap. Media sensors. So media sensors has been a huge clusterfuck, actually. We were some of the first to actually enable you to capture images or audio from web content on a mobile device. So we began by just considering the camera. Obviously, we didn't consider front-facing cameras. We didn't consider video and a few other things. We didn't consider that we would be getting 10 megapixel images, a lot of stuff. And so this has evolved quite a bit. And so the media capture API of the W3C is what defines that. So on the HTML5 side, we do have things like the input and accept image. So you can actually on, I believe, yeah, this one's in Firefox for Android. If you have that, you can actually use this input type right now to capture an image. So obviously, this isn't a device API, but a similar sort of thing. And the media capture has finally evolved to this thing called get user media. All related to WebRTC, which we particularly are interested in. But yeah, so get user media, not supported anywhere yet, but this is going to be the future of audio, video, and image capture. So I would definitely recommend that you go and check that out. So in PhoneGap, however, like I said, it's been a big cluster. So we actually implemented our own things a long time ago, the way that you capture images. We actually, strangely enough, we implemented getPicture, the bottom one there, camera, navigator.camera.getPicture. It returns back either a base64 encoded string of the data, and or you can actually get back the file URI path on the device. So those were the two options that we had back then. Obviously, then we had to create things like a file transfer API, which is completely non-standard before XHR2 was even around, and because obviously once you have a picture, you want to be able to upload it. That's the logical next step. But then, so camera is sort of deprecated getPicture, despite the fact that it's the easiest and best way to do it at the moment. And then we looked at the W3C, which had the capture specification. So the top one there is the capture navigator.device.capture.capture image. And so it's a little bit more difficult. It returns back just file system info for you. It doesn't return back your base64 encoded string, which is always really useful for just inserting as an image in your application or what have you. So you do have those two options. And of course, like I said, we're going to be doing the get user media very shortly. And so you'll have three options for capturing in PhoneGap. Perfect. As I mentioned, WebRTC is part of the get user media stuff. Super interesting. It's essentially this nice purple layer in the top middle there. So that's the API. That'll be the API for web developers to actually enable you to do content streaming and all sorts of awesome stuff. I know, this really makes sense, right? Yeah, easy. Connection, so connection is another one. You'd think it would be really easy. But again, Navigator Online, that was sort of the first idea about connection, which is, well, it's a bit of a misnomer really about how it works. And I really don't know why they decided to put a capital L. I guess maybe, yeah. Otherwise, you'd think it was an event online, whatever that means. So this was actually evolved into the System Info API of the W3C. The System Info API looked like this. Again, at some point, everybody got really frightened because this looks horrendous as well. There's lots of shit here that nobody's actually ever going to implement. And so they actually dropped this, luckily. And the connection API is sort of what came out of it. It's like, OK, well, let's drop all of that ugly crap, and let's just stick with connection and let them know if they're on a Wi-Fi, 3G, or what have you. So this is what's currently in PhoneGap as well. So navigator.network.connection.type. And this is, like I mentioned, in the W3C Network Info API working draft. And that's a super important API, I should also mention, for building PhoneGap applications, because you're commonly offline, like my phone is right now, on mobile devices. Battery status, this one's a really interesting one. We actually don't implement this because of the irony there, in that it does actually drain your battery life. So the W3C, this is based on the W3C battery status API candidate recommendation. So obviously on desktops, it's not really a big deal. You have a lot more battery power than on your mobile device. So we actually support 1 or 2 different battery status APIs that you can take a look at online, actually. But there's a few other events like discharging, time change, and a few others like that that are defined by this W3C specification. Of course, there's a lot of data APIs as well, things like contacts. Yes, those people that you actually talk to on your phone, strangely enough, not your Facebook friends. And this is, of course, also that same data that all those native apps were stealing without you even knowing, apparently, right? Pretty basic API, whole bunch of contact find options, navigator.contacts.find, and you can just get your contacts off of the device. In reality, of course, this works out to be a little bit more difficult on things like on Android devices where you have multiple Google accounts connected, or you're even connected with your LinkedIn account or what have you. So this stuff can get pretty messy, but or on like things like WebOS, where there's actually, obviously we're writing HTML, JavaScript, CSS on WebOS platform, and there's actually no way to write contacts, for example. So this all can't be implemented everywhere anyhow, but it is defined by the W3C in the Contacts API working draft. And all this stuff is working today in PhoneGap, so you can build apps that steal people's contact information without them knowing. Fantastic. File system, so again, more data APIs. File system API, in my opinion, is horrendous and just absolutely ridiculous. I mean, I think it's a great example of the W3C defining APIs that they've never used, obviously. And anyhow, I won't go on about that. But it is defined by the W3C in the file API working draft. So this is a really simple way of reading a text file, right? I mean, it's super simple. You have to get file writers and file entries and all this sort of crap. So the best code here is the fail code because it's so short. So that stuff is all, again, in PhoneGap today. That's actually, file system is also in, I think it's Chrome today. There is the file system APIs are in there, Chrome on desktop, but of course it's certainly not on any mobile device browser today. App lifecycle events, so these are some of the events that we actually found that we needed to build these applications, but were never defined anywhere, of course. So we defined our own, 3 of the most important ones. We have a whole list of events that we've defined that are totally outside of the realm of W3C device APIs. The 3 that we defined are device ready, so that's for better or for worse. I don't know if I really agree with the naming, but I guess everyone makes mistakes, right? Device ready essentially means that your native code in your application is ready and your HTML code is ready. So that's when that event will fire. That's the main event that you need to know about for writing a PhoneGap application. Pause and resume event, pretty self-explanatory. If you have background processes enabled on your device or not, your pause and resume events will fire appropriately. Some other events that people are not considering at all are actually things like back buttons. So on mobile devices, back buttons were, oddly enough, really important on a lot of devices. Not iOS device. And I understand everybody, I was really interested to see that in Australia, something like 70% of the smartphone market is iOS here. It's amazing. So you guys obviously don't give a shit about back buttons. I was very surprised. I mentioned the Mozilla WebAPI stuff earlier. I think that this is also super interesting. The Boot to Gecko project, which if you haven't heard about it, it's essentially a web-based, sort of like WebOS, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it. But and they have some devices out there already that for developers, and you can actually build applications with HTML, JavaScript, CSS. The whole OS is based on that. You can actually go to the dialer and you can view source on the dialer on your phone. I thought that was the coolest thing ever. So the Boot to Gecko project is super interesting, and they're essentially implementing all of these Mozilla WebAPI APIs, device APIs, which is very cool. So the web APIs that they have, if you go to wiki.mozilla.org/webapi, you'll actually be able to look into all of these things. So they define things like telephony, SMS, orientation, settings API, the resource lock, power management, mobile connection, sensors, whole bunch of ones, like proximity and ambient light sensors even. It's very, very cool. So things like NFC, Bluetooth, intents, you name it, they have pretty much an API defined for that. And it's super, super interesting. Of course, PhoneGap and things like Boot to Gecko, there are a lot of actual web runtimes that are available today. So PhoneGap, of course, we actually try to work with all of them and smooth out all of the inconsistencies across them and give them one API for them. But there are a whole bunch of web runtimes. So things like Tizen, which we're working with Intel and Samsung, and Intel and Samsung are actually contributing a port for PhoneGap to run on Tizen, which is really cool. Windows 8 obviously will be supporting JavaScript as a first-class runtime. WebWorks on BlackBerry, which has been around forever. We work really closely with them. WebOS, of course. Who knows what's going to happen with that exactly, but and ourselves included here. So I think these are really interesting approaches, obviously, and we're all in different ways pushing forward on defining these device APIs and actually getting them implemented in applications. So we're all, working really hard. We'll never lose. So I'm just going to take a few last minutes near the end here to discuss about some of the challenges actually that are going forward with these. In particular, mobile is an interesting context, of course. We have some good things and bad things. On the good side, of course, we actually have a better sandboxing model for the most part for applications in mobile. So it's harder in some ways to get at data. In some ways, obviously, it's a lot easier. So it's obviously very bad because you actually have your contacts all in there and accessible through these APIs on mobile devices. Whereas on desktop, you're not sandboxed. So that's obviously bad. You don't want like a web application going and reading file system from anywhere it wants. But you also don't have things like contacts APIs built into the desktop. So it's harder for a web application on the desktop to actually steal your contact information. But it's a lot easier on mobile. So that is certainly one of the first problems is the security. And even things like the Chrome Web App Store, Boot to Gecko, all these things are, and even on mobile devices for just native applications. There are a lot of security concerns, obviously, and a lot of different ways of going about solving those. And we certainly don't have any particular, we sort of leave it up to the developer, I guess, and we can let the developer shoot themselves in the foot if they really want to. If they want to load some script in a PhoneGap application on an iOS device that has the PhoneGap APIs there accessible like contacts, and they load a script from phishing.com or whatever, and then that can actually go and access your contacts then, fair enough. We don't actually try to prevent that, but that's obviously a very real concern. And that's obviously a very real concern for more widespread adoption of this. and in particular, more widespread adoption of just these device APIs in a browser instance rather than device APIs in a browser in a native app. Of course, well, not privacy yet. In those native apps, of course, on the various operating systems like Android, you actually have to specifically mention the permission. So if you are going to steal contact details without telling people, you can just show them that at the start, and they'll look at it and ignore it and then install it anyway. So that's obviously one way that they do permissioning, or you could do the gatekeeper approach like the App Store. But there's obviously a lot of security concerns there because on the web, we don't have either of those things right now. Geolocation. Talk about privacy a bit. Geolocation is a good example of one of these device APIs that's on the web at large and on all modern browsers. So of course, everyone here probably knows what happens when you go to Yelp or whatever. I noticed there aren't many places on Yelp down here. I don't know. Maybe I need to go to yelp.com.au. But when you search on there, it always comes up. This site wants to get your location using your geolocation. And so that's obviously you can say yes or no and accept or deny that. But you're not actually going to want to do that for every single call that a person is going to make with any of these device APIs. Otherwise, you have a whole stack of those things there, right? And obviously, you don't just want to let them do it. So there's a bit of a problem there between the user experience and actually keeping things secure. I mentioned some of the permissions issues there. It's a very common thing on Android, of course, where you'll give it permission. I know one of my coworkers, when they did, it must have been, I think it was Google+, and installed Google+, and then was like, WTF, why are all my photos up online all of a sudden? It was like, oh yeah, well you just clicked through and like, you just clicked right through and it said it was gonna upload them, so buyer beware. So permissions is obviously a huge problem, and on the web at large, even more of a problem than it is in installable apps. Capabilities. It's getting better, I guess, but obviously there's a lot of devices. There are a lot of devices with varying capabilities, and dealing with that is certainly a challenge going forward. Performance has always been a challenge. We were actually joking last night that we should pretty much try to get rid of the PhoneGap name altogether, because, and we'll relate that to like the old web of like, Android 1.5 when PhoneGap apps really perform poorly. And Cordova is the new high-speed PhoneGap, because on iOS 5 and Android 4, it's actually really quite performant. But of course, even though it is performant on those platforms, Android 2.x is, of course, the new IE6, especially for web browser, even web-based installable apps like PhoneGap. It's just terrible. So I think what is it, on the Android right now, if you go to the Android developer site and you can look, Android 2.3.x, 2.33 even, I think, is something like 67% of Android devices out there today. So, and something like 2% are Android 4, which is actually quite good. So Android 2.x is going to be a real problem going forward, and it's going to be our new IE6. But luckily, of course, Courage Wolf comes to the rescue again. And so, like all bad things like IE6, we'll get over Android eventually. And I think that's going to bring things to a close. I think I got about 10 minutes left to take any questions. And I'd like to thank all you guys for coming out and learning a bit about device APIs. Thanks.